The Civil War, which started in 1861 and ended in 1865, marked a turning point in American history in many areas, notably medicine. With the invention of new weaponry, old medical techniques proved to be highly inefficient. Poorly run hospitals became overrun by thousands of injured soldiers. Casualty rates skyrocketed, culminating in the deaths of over 600,000 Americans, and shockingly, 2/3 of the deaths were a result from diseases, infections, and injuries. Realizing the frailty of medical facilities under unsanitary conditions, Americans began to emphasize the importance of building a solid foundation in the area of medicine. The devastations of the Civil War proved the shortcomings in previous medical infrastructures and compelled Americans to further progress their scope of medicine in terms of expanding medical facilities and developing more sanitary techniques.
Prior to the Civil War, American armies used muskets as their primary source of weapon. They were inaccurate, which kept casualty rates relatively low. The outbreak of the Civil War changed this with the invention of the minié-ball and the rifle, which easily penetrated through bodies with high accuracy and lethality.
It was during the Civil War that rifling technology had been developed, so that the guns they're holding up now are correctly called rifles. They're not muskets anymore. And the rifling meant that there are grooves inside the barrel and there are grooves on the bullets. So the projectile comes out in a much tighter spiral, like a football thrown, and is therefore much, much more accurate. Yet soldiers continued to walk right into that fire. So the generals were slow on changing tactics. It was becoming suicidal to fight the way you had always fought.
The minié-ball, also packed with lead, was able to destroy bones up to 3 inches from the site of impact. The Civil War was also different from previous wars in that the invention of railroads and increase in industrial production led to larger armies and therefore increased casualty rates.
A higher percentage of Americans died in the Civil War than in any war in American history. In fact, more Americans died in the Civil War, not just percentage, but in absolute numbers, than all other wars in American history added together until, I think, Vietnam.
Despite the growing lethality of warfare, medical knowledge remained far more primitive. There were no antibiotics or antiseptics. Sterility was not emphasized during surgeries, and both the hospitals and camps were kept in poor hygiene. Most hospitals were typically regular civilian buildings, and officers often even discouraged the creation of hospitals as they believed that soldiers would never return to their regiments. The war, which was fought mostly in the hot southern climate, exposed soldiers to diseases that thrived in such environments, including malaria, dysentery, and typhoid fever.
You suddenly have huge numbers of people living in very, very close confinement. The disposal of human waste was not very efficient. In fact, early on in the war, you simply made your way to the outskirts of camp, did your business. As a result, when disease spread, it spread rapidly. This is pre-modern medicine. It was only just developing. Still, far more deaths from disease than battlefield deaths.
One reason why medical treatment was so poor at the time was due to how most people expected the war to be short. The First Battle of Bull Run would show otherwise. The Union commander George B. McClellan would appoint the first medical director of Union Army, Charles S. Tripler, who would launch a first series of reforms in the Union Army. Other people who would later be important in reforming the medical infrastructure would include men such as William Alexander Hammond, Samuel Preston Moore, and even women such as Clara Barton.
The Confederacy was the first to organize a medical corps for the Army. Samuel Preston Moore was selected by Jefferson Davis as the Surgeon General on July 30, 1861. Moore would increase the standards in recruiting Confederate surgeons and organize the Confederate Medical Department. Moore required doctors to pass an exam to be able to operate on patients and oversaw the construction of Confederate hospitals. Later, he would commission Manual of Military Surgery and Resources of Southern Fields and Forests, 2 books which would be the resource for Confederate medicine. Due to their lack of resources, however, the medical corps would be poorly run. One Confederate soldier described the amputation process as follows. The surgeons and their assistants, stripped to the waist and bespattered with blood, stood around, some holding the poor fellows while others, armed with long, bloody knives and saws, cut and sawed away with frightful rapidity, throwing the mangled limbs on a pile nearby as soon as removed. On June 18, 1861, the Union authorized the United States Sanitary Commission, a private relief agency, to provide medical and sanitary support to its army. The civilian organization would hold sanitation fairs in order to collect funds and raise awareness to the public. Additionally, the commission would inspect the quality of soldiers' camps and hospitals and record their findings. One of the major problems suffered by the Union Army was an incompetent system of transporting soldiers. In the First Battle of Bull Run, many wounded Union soldiers were left untreated in the scorching fields for days, sometimes even nearly a week. The problem escalated as paved road systems were especially absent, making the trip to a hospital especially discomforting. Dr. Jonathan Letterman, who replaced Tripler as the medical director of the Army, would come to reform the transport of soldiers by putting together the first ambulance corps system for the Army. The organized system of ambulance would greatly help out the Union during the Battle of Antietam, the bloodiest battle in Civil War history. Still, the reformed ambulance corps alone would not be sufficient enough to prevent the lack of medicine and treatment during the Civil War. Clara Barton, who volunteered as a nurse for the Union, described the lack of supplies and medicine that were provided to soldiers during the Battle of Antietam. "Look here," a soldier said, "see what we need and how much we need it. We have no more chloroform, no more bandages nor lint, no more liquor, nothing. See here." And he showed me some poor fellows whose raw new wounds were actually dressed with those rough corn leaves. In 1862, William Hammond became Surgeon General for the Union Army. Hammond sought to change the requirements needed to become a surgeon, similar to the more in the South. Hammond began to reform the hospital system as well, converting buildings in conquered towns into a place to house the wounded. Medical inspector generals were also sent by Hammond to inspect the quality of the hospitals as well. The Union would end the war having created 204 general hospitals with 136,984 beds.
The progress of medicine in midst of the Civil War had both immense short and long-term impacts. In the short term, armies were able to better organize their medical corps by implementing reforms in a regiment that had been widely neglected in the past. A stricter requirement for physicians to operate on soldiers also helped reduce chances of a botched operation. Additionally, people began to understand the value of maintaining a sanitary environment in operating tables and hospital wards. The Sanitation Commission set up by the Union allowed for additional funding to take care of the injured soldiers, preventing casualty rates from reaching even further. More permanent hospital buildings were set up in larger cities as well, and in some cases, specialized hospitals that were created to treat for a specific part of the body became available for the general public. The long-term effects were just as, if not more substantial, than the short-term effects. Today, germ theory, or the idea that diseases are caused by microorganisms like bacteria that exist in unclean environments, is widely accepted. Women were often employed as nurses during the Civil War, and through their war efforts were able to gain some social status in America following the end of the war. This served as an event that paved the way for the struggle for women's rights in America. Prior to the Civil War, hospitals were often viewed as a place of death. Reforms in medical facilities during the Civil War helped change its reputation, and hospitals today are seen as a place of rehabilitation and recovery. The hundreds of makeshift hospitals made in the Civil War conceived the precursor of hospital designs common today. Designated wards of ventilated rooms for each medical department, stemming from a central administration of buildings. Sarah Barton, a nurse who saw the disasters of the war firsthand, would move on to establish the American Red Cross in 1881. Today, this medical organization operates both on a national and international scale and is one of the largest humanitarian causes in the world with an estimated 13 million volunteers.
In conclusion, the devastations of the Civil War proved the shortcomings in previous medical infrastructures and compelled Americans to further progress their scope of medicine in terms of expanding medical facilities and developing more sanitary techniques. During the Civil War, medicine proved to be outdated while weaponry was new and advanced. The medical treatments were done in horrible, unhygienic conditions. The medical system was also disorganized and inefficient in treating the wounded. The Civil War revealed to Americans the frailty in their medical infrastructure and began to reform it in several ways. They were able to make advancements in creating a healthier surgical environment by creating institutions such as the United States Sanitary Commission. Americans were also able to better organize the structure of the medical corps in the Army, with the creation of an ambulance corps and hospitals to treat the wounded. It was because of the effects of medicine in the Civil War that treatment and recovery in modern warfare today is vastly different, with many more recoverable injuries than what it would have been without the war. The Civil War revealed to the world that outdated medical techniques could not coexist with modern warfare.